Good morning to the judges, the audience, my opponents. Today, we are here to debate on the resolution, resolved, that the United States should intervene in another nation's struggle for democracy. We, as the proposition, strongly support this resolution, and these are the reasons why. Number one, intervention for democracy is in the United States' best interest. Number two, the democratic peace theory. We would like to define the word intervene as meaning to interfere with an action or a cause, especially of a condition or a process. Throughout history, countries which have employed democratic principles, such as a free market economy, have always been seen to have performed better than those which employ non-democratic principles. For example, North Korea and Cuba have suffered from shortages of food and other necessities. Recently, even China, an extremely hardline communist country, has recognized the need for change and has started to change their stance from a command economy to a somewhat mixed economy. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the US is the world's biggest military spender. Therefore, as the most powerful country in the world, the US has a duty to intervene in other nations in order to liberate other human beings, permitting them to enjoy the basic, undeniable rights of a free life. Furthermore, the US also has a duty to its own citizens to protect them. According to the democratic peace, two democratic countries have never gone to war with each other. There have been some exceptions, such as the state of war between the UK and Finland during World War II. But this was technical because there was no actual military action during this conflict. It works because it is more difficult to go to war when you have to approach your legislative body to gain approval to go to war. Most countries enshrine in their constitutions the need to have approval from the people before a move towards war can be made. For example, the US initially pursued a policy of non-intervention during World War I because of opposition from certain quarters. They argued that the US should have no part in the conflict. This was the reason that it was extremely difficult for the US to enter the conflict. Elected representatives continuously refuted the concept of joining the war because their constituents did not want them to. On the other hand, Great Britain and France, one a constitutional monarchy and the other a republican government, both democratic, were both directly provoked to an act of war and were forced to act. Their main opponents, Germany and Austria-Hungary, both had monarchies. Their countries were ruled by a single ruler. Clearly, democracy is the more peaceful choice. The US will be protecting its citizens by intervening to promote democracy. There will be a reduced threat of war, and the US can spend more money improving the welfare of the citizens in other areas such as education and social security. Furthermore, the US will also gain allies when they help another country seek democracy. Examples include Iraq and Afghanistan in the Middle East. These go beyond strategic alliances. The United States makes important friends which will undoubtedly give them bargaining power in important decisions. Therefore, it is with absolute conviction that we say the United States should intervene in another nation's struggle for democracy. Thank you.
Honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, my teammate and I strongly object to the resolution because it is evident that the United States of America does not have the right to lead any promotion of democracy in the world. The US is not prepared to do this because they are not leading by good example as a democratic nation. What about the 9/11 attacks, ladies and gentlemen? 2,977 American citizens were ruthlessly killed in this act, carried out by 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists, one of which was their leader, Osama bin Laden. It was a dark time indeed for the country. The public was informed that the terrorists had planned the 9/11 attacks because of their alien sense of anti-Americanism, which stemmed due to the fact that, according to George Bush, the former US president, we were freedom-loving people. It wasn't until 3 years after the attack that the vague reason for the attacks became clearer, when Bin Laden responded, "Why, if this were true, had we not attacked freedom-loving Sweden?" Members of the floor, why did the US decide to mask the true motives behind Osama's actions and mislead the public to assume that it was due to the hate for a democratic government that the Al-Qaeda decided to strike? The greatest element of a democratic government is, as mentioned by Abraham Lincoln, that the people's opinion is respected. However, standing by the fact that there has never ever been a clear public explanation on the root cause of 9/11 attacks, the element has clearly been abused. The result of this abuse is the formation of biased, one-side view shared by the mass public. As democracy is about its people, the people of America deserve to be informed of the truth of their own nation. How does this reality, where a minority of prominent figures is able to keep the truth from their own people, make the US a truly democratic nation? I would say the US must work on establishing the true democratic system in their own nation before considering the option of intervening in another nation's struggle for democracy. If the US ignores this and intervenes again in the name of helping a certain nation gain democracy, the United States of America will never ever be able to escape the fear of terrorism and the wars. History would only repeat itself, and this will bring terrible consequences not only to America but also to the rest of the world. Therefore, America must first lead by example before they can expect other nations to receive help with open arms. I would like to end my speech with a quote by the famous orator Edmund Burke. "Example is the school of mankind, and they will learn at no other." Thank you.
Do you know that intervention is both necessary and legal under international humanitarian law?
Are you aware that this is clearly illegal under international law and is against the Charter of the United Nations? In the US, as a member of the United Nations, they are committed to follow the laws. This proposal clearly violates the most fundamental principle, no interference in the internal affairs of another country. Are you aware of that?
No. The UN is a coalition.
What do you mean by no?
No, I'm not aware. The UN is a coalition. The UN is a coalition of nations.
Yes.
So they act, when the US acts alone, it's act under the banner of the United Nations.
Are you aware of that? Are you aware that Iraq
Yes.
war, US intervened in Iraq without the permission of the UN? Are you aware of that?
That wasn't internal affairs. The UN intervened in Iraq. The US intervened in Iraq because they saw that Iraq posed a direct threat.
And was there any evidence of that?
Yes.
Where is the evidence?
It's in the US, in the Pentagon. They've got their documents. They've killed the biggest murderer. When Saddam Hussein was killed, you know the Time magazine used the red X to mark his picture, and they've only done that once before when Adolf Hitler was killed.
Yeah, I don't
That shows how big the threat.
what you're trying to say here. And you have mentioned that the United States should intervene because it is in the United States' best interest. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by the best interest?
It is in the best interest. Their best interests are to protect their citizens, right?
Yes.
Alright, so according to democratic peace theory, two nations, as I said, which are democratic, have never gone to war except for some minor borderline.
How do you know that they'll never go? I mean, okay, fine.
Because it's much more difficult for the democratic nation to go to war. It's a simple fact. It's much more difficult for a democratic nation to go to war. Much more difficult.
How do you know that if the America invest a lot of money and invest all their troops and armies and sacrifices the nation, how do you know that the nation is going to the biting of the US? How do you know that they're going to serve the interests of the US?
In an ideal world, they might not, but we are living in a world of a lot of politics and thought. That's how it is. It will.
If you have not noticed that, look at the UN supervised elections in Palestine. Hamas won the elections in Gaza, and both the US and Israel have refused to recognize the elected government because it did not serve the interests of the US. How do you explain that?
Did you know that The US does not directly elect them.
Good morning, judges, opponents, and everyone present today. I would like to restate that we, the opposition, are firmly against the resolution that the United States should intervene in another nation's struggle for democracy. I would like to begin by rebutting some of my points proposed by the opposition. They stated that the Iraq War was in fact started because in search of weapons of mass destruction, not to promote democracy. Promoting democracy is of vital importance to unifying the political sides in the United States. The link between the lack of democracy and terrorism really has its implications on American politics. It provides a unifying team for Democrats and Republicans alike, one that honors American ideals while helping keep the vast American public safe and secure. Despite politicians having had some difficulty in selling this democracy promotion to the American people, the tyranny terror link here provides a promising narrative for US policy in managing the immense challenges of the Middle East. Furthermore, the United States has a moral imperative to support and promote democracy. The US, for better or worse, has claimed to be a nation that stands for something greater, beyond its very borders in the past. That is why people all around the world today look to the US in search for hope, support, and leadership, regardless of whether they get it or not. America is not Botswana. The President of the United States is not the Premier of China. It is clearly declared under US policy, under both the Obama and Bush administrations, that the United States will support the universal democratic aspirations of the world. In this sense, America has encouraged the world to do what Americans would do in similar circumstances: resist oppression and fight for freedom. Moving on, the United States has to promote democracy to maintain its credibility. Dropping democracy out of the agenda would ignore the fact that American ideals coincide with those of the majority of Middle Easterners, who, according to Shadi Hamid, a director of research at the Brookings Doha Center, are angry at the US not for promoting democracy, but because they do not. When America says it wants democracy, but does very little about it, the American credibility suffers, and as a direct result, America is vulnerable to charges of hypocrisy. This credibility gap should not be dismissed. Ultimately, the fight against terror is not simply about connecting the dots, improving interagency coordination, and killing terrorists. It is equally as important to have a broader vision that addresses the sources of political violence. Therefore, if the US is inconsistent about democracy promotion, it loses credibility. Inconsistencies in the application of democracy policies must be reduced. Complexity of US interest in the world inevitably limits the role of ideals in the US foreign policy. Nevertheless, the United States can show the world that it takes democracy seriously. It demonstrates a willingness to apply genuine pressure for democratic change, not only on hostile regimes, but also on some friendly tyrants as well, such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
Honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I would like to echo what my partner has mentioned earlier. The US is not prepared for an intervention. Why? They are not leading by a good example as a democratic nation themselves. It is undeniable that the US intervention has always been hugely based on their self-interests. If they were to really intervene for the sake of helping the nation, for democracy, why didn't the US choose to intervene in poorer nations such as Yemen, Congo, Darfur, and Tibet? Well, it's because of double purpose the United States even considers to help these nations. Ladies and gentlemen, the number one priority of America now is to admit and solve the root problems of terrorism, wars, and anti-Americanism within their own nation, which directly relate to their nation's security. issues in foreign relations rather than intervening in another nation and repeating its grim history. The US intervention will only worsen the hatred and give them more reasons to terrorize and attack America. Intervening will not be beneficial at all and will only stir up another problem. Does America really need one more? In history in Korea, Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan repeats itself in many other countries. At the same time, the US will not be able to stand anymore. They will end up destroying themselves by turning its own people against one another and the existence of too much fear or terrorism and wars. This will eventually lead to the destruction of the rest of the world. Now, let me go through what my opponent has mentioned. The intervention, my partner has said, it was against the UN even allowing it. They went in without the permission of the UN. Secondly, the US is not part of the UN, and why would America help every single country? America is part of these 200 countries. There's too many for America to go in and intervene with each and every 200 countries in this whole world. Does America actually have to put up with this burden and go through every country? No. America has its problems too. People of this country has voted about 4 points which they are not happy with, unemployment and things like that. America should focus on that before going to another country. Therefore, we believe that the United States should not intervene in another struggle for democracy.
Iraq. I said that the war in Iraq was in search of weapons of mass destruction, not to promote democracy.
You said that my partner said that.
Yes, and I pointed out that the main focus of the intervention was in search of weapons of mass destruction, according to the US administration.
You said that the US should intervene in every country's struggle for democracy. What is struggle to the United States? What is counted as a struggle?
Struggle for democracy is what we would like to define as a struggle within the country itself to either keep...
Yes, but what I'm saying is what will be considered as a struggle to America? What will they count as a struggle to go in and then intervene? Let me repeat what I'm trying to say.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. What I'm trying to say is, should the US go in and intervene in every country's struggle for democracy? What is counted as a struggle for the US to go in and intervene?
A struggle for the US?
A struggle for the US to go in and intervene. What is counted as a struggle? What is struggle to the US?
There is no struggle to the US. The struggle is in the nation.
I know, I'm saying what would the US say is a struggle?
As I was trying to say, the struggle for democracy is what happens when local citizens are struggling to maintain democracy or initiate a democratic government.
Okay.
Now,
also,
you said that the United States should not bother going around every 200 countries trying to promote democracy. I'd like to point out that not every country is struggling for democracy. And you said that the United States is not prepared to promote democracy. The United States has a long history with democracy. It spends a lot on the military. What do you have to say about that?
There's a saying by Abraham Lincoln that it should be done by the people and for the people. Why should America go and intervene?
A survey...
Who is America to go in and intervene? It should be done by the United States.
A survey by the Harvard University states that when democracy is imposed by outsiders, greater gains and benefits are seen.
Yeah, but wouldn't it last longer if it's done by its own people?
I just pointed out that it doesn't. So, when it's imposed by outsiders, it lasts longer because a proven system is implemented in the country. They don't have to work it out.
Okay, but the United States also has its own problems. Why should the US just go in and intervene?
Of course, it has its own problems, but when the nation itself is struggling for democracy,
Yeah,
shouldn't the US as the world leaders come in and help them out?
The cost of money is $1.171 trillion of debt. America should go and help with that.
That was one war. Let me point out the first Gulf War, alright? The first Gulf War costed about $50 billion. However, Saudi Arabia paid about $30 billion of that for the US. This is how it helped create allies.
There was oil in Saudi Arabia. It was oil, double purpose.
No, the point of this was, I'm talking about the first Gulf War.
In summation, intervention for democracy is in the US best interests. It will cause a higher quality of life and bring more peace to its citizens. The democratic peace theory works due to the difficulties of getting a legislative board to approve a request for war. The threat of war will be reduced and money can be channeled towards improving the welfare of the citizens. Next, the US has a moral imperative to support and promote democracy. They must substantiate their claim of being a nation that stands for more than their own country. Nations look to the US as a role model. This is why the US is always part of many major organizations, whether as a participant or an observer. The US also has to promote democracy because they always speak about it. If the US does not remain consistent about promoting democracy, it loses credibility. Therefore, we would again like to reiterate that the US should intervene in another nation's struggle for democracy. Thank you.
Judges, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we strongly object to the proposition. We believe the US should not intervene in another nation's struggle for democracy because they're not leading by good example as the global leader of democracy themselves. Thus, they're not prepared for an intervention. Despite the fact that the US is the first country to think of when it comes to democracy, the US must work on establishing the true democratic system in their own nation before even considering the option of intervention in another nation's struggle for democracy. Knowing that the US will always intervene based on their selfish desires, if the US ignores this and intervenes again in the name of helping a certain nation gain democracy, they will never be able to escape the fear of terrorism, wars, and anti-Americanism. It will just become an endless pattern for the US, and the history will repeat, and will bring terrible consequences to both the US and the world. Thus, we believe the US should not intervene in another nation's struggle for democracy. Thank you.
Interventions will always end badly.
I didn't say that. We did admit that there were some cases where...
You said that I asked you to.
No, I don't.
Right.
Well, don't you think that there were also many cases of failure of intervention of the US as well?
Like?
Afghanistan?
What says that?
Afghanistan, Iraq, were all part of America's war on terror. They were not initially interventions to promote democracy. They were part of America's war on terror, and this war on terror corrupted democracy promotion.
But we're trying to say it was still an intervention.
These interventions are work.
Right, let me talk about it. As a South Korean, America did intervene in Korean War, right? Am I right? And what is now? What is it? What's the result? What happened to North Korea? North Korea is also Korea as well. We care about them, and I personally am very hurt because they intervened, and our nation, my nation, is divided into two different nations, and the war is not the end of it.
First of all, there are other nations such as Panama, other countries in which intervention was successful. You were only singling out one nation where it was not.
I believe this debate it's ridiculous because it is, in the first place, it's illegal under international law. It's against the Charter of the United Nations. There's no, it's not. Sorry, please let me speak first. Right? No interference in United Nations internal affairs. That's the international law. You should follow it. And US, okay, US is the dominant power of the world. It's true. It's the global leader of democracy. But it's just one of the many nations, one of the 224 nations. So if US were to intervene, as you said, there were cases where they intervened and they succeeded. But if they wanted to intervene, they should do it as UN, not as US.
So your point is?
They should do it as UN.
So they should intervene.
Even under any circumstances, if they were to do it, they should not do it as UN, they should do it as
Iraq and Afghanistan posed a direct threat to their security. It was internal affairs. They went into Afghanistan because Osama bin Laden sent some crazy mad people to bomb their buildings.
Alright, so you agree that the United States should intervene under the banner of the United Nations?
Yes, they shouldn't, but not just United States. Let's look at the resolution, guys. Excuse me, let's look at the resolution first. The subject is US, not UN.
The US intervenes as part of the
Even
United
if, under all the circumstances,
it doesn't mean that if the United
under
Nations,
any circumstances,
simply nonetheless, the United States still intervene.
The United States still plays a part.
Yeah, they still intervene.
yes, as well as other nations too.
613 countries are democratic, out of which 93 are considered to be free, in which 53 are considered to be highly free, out of which only 20 countries are not. In contrast, 75 countries which are not democratic, a mere 24 are considered free, with none considered as highly free. We also talked about how the United States must remain consistent to maintain the credibility and emerge as the world leader it truly is. We also rebutted our points proposed by our opposition, and we proved them wrong through concrete stats. I also talked about how this promotion of democracy unifies Americans by unifying the American politics, by bringing Democrats and Republicans together to achieve one main goal. Furthermore, the democratic peace theory proves beyond doubt that promoting democracy is required. It is essentially required for the war on terror, simply because countries which are not, the lack of democracy in countries, in some cases, create terrorism. Take, for example, it's not that easy to find a country which is democratic and has terrorism. Thank you.
A very good morning to everyone present in this August House today. Remember the saying by Abraham Lincoln in his address at Gettysburg? A government of the people, by the people, and for the people. According to Gallup's latest national poll, the majority of Americans rate 4 issues: the democracy, unemployment, the healthcare, and the huge budget deficit. Has this not reached America's peak? Before preaching to another nation and intervening, America, a democratic nation, should listen to its people. The list of problems with our international affairs is appalling. A true patriot would insist that circumstances indicate we should clean up our own backyard before we concern ourselves with the messy yards of others. Thank you.